Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session From Oversight to Insight, Reimagining Compliance for Global Capability Centers. The title itself sets the tone for why this discussion matters. We are deliberately moving from the idea of oversight to the idea of insight. For a long time, compliance in India has been about supervision, inspections, and post facto checks. But in the GCC environment, compliance is increasingly about judgment, foresight, and influencing decisions before the risks manifest. For compliance officers working in GCCs, India in India, the role is fundamentally different from that in traditional Indian companies. It is no longer enough to understand only national laws. Compliance teams today have to navigate Indian regulations alongside global standards. The home country laws, the board level expectations, and enforcement risks across multiple jurisdictions. This makes compliance more complex, but also far more strategic. To explore this shift, we've been joined today by three leaders who've worked extensively in Indian operating environments and today engage with global organizations where compliance is shaped by multi-jurisdictional governance. Let me start quickly by introducing our panelists. My first panelist is Dr. Simrat Sohal, who is the Ethics and Compliance Leader at GlaxoSmithKline India with over 3 decades of experience in global healthcare and pharmaceutical sector. She leads enterprise-wide compliance, governance, and risk management initiatives and has worked closely with the CEOs, boards, and senior leaderships across jurisdiction. Her expertise spans anti-bribery and corruption, third-party risk management, privacy, corporate governance, and cultural transformation. She has previously held senior compliance roles at Becton Dickinson, Eli Lilly, and Curious Technology, and brings a strong international legal grounding to her work. Welcome, Dr. Sohal. My next participant today is Samriddhi Kumari. She is an AVP, Secretarial and Compliance at AllianceBernstein Business Services in India. She leads legal governance and compliance strategy for India operations of a global asset manager. Samriddhi has managed end-to-end compliance for entities listed on Indian and international exchanges, including National Stock Exchange, Bombay Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, the Singapore Exchange, and Luxembourg Stock Exchange. Earlier in her career, she served as Company Secretary and Compliance Officer at a legacy Indian consumer durables group during a major insolvency proceeding, working closely with regulators, law firms, and advisory firms. She brings a rare blend of Indian corporate law depth alongside global capital market exposure. Welcome, Samriddhi.
Thank you so much, Rishi, for this very kind and generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here and to contribute to this session.
Excellent. Let me now introduce Saloni Agara. She is an AVP and Head of Legal at Apex Group, where she leads the legal function and partners closely with the business teams on regulatory and governance matters. She has over a decade of experience across highly regulated sectors, including BFSI, aviation, pharmaceutical, infrastructure, and global professional services. Before Apex, Saloni held senior legal roles at organizations such as Hitachi Rail, Bangalore International Airport, Waters Corporation, and Murray Global. Her experience spans regulatory investigations, complex commercial contracts, litigation, and large infrastructure projects, giving her a strong perspective on how compliance operates across very different risk environments. Welcome, Saloni.
Thank you so much, Rishi.
So if we can get the question started, I'd like to begin by asking a broader question to all three of you. Each of you have worked closely with Indian operating environments and global governance frameworks. When you compare the two, what stands out in how organizations expect compliance function beyond just the letter of the law? Dr. Sohal, perhaps I can start with you. You've worked closely with the CEOs and boards across global organizations. How different are the board level conversations in a GCC setup as compared to those in traditional Indian companies? Is compliance viewed primarily as a risk to be managed or a capability that actively shapes the organization's decision making?
Thank you, Rishi, for the question, and also thank you for the introduction. I would like to take a step back. Now, I'll speak basically from life sciences, and GCC has evolved over time. Yes, you're right. Initially, when these was being set up, they were basically cost saving. They were like back end office, basically to do all those mundane works which nobody in the global team wanted to pick up, like regulatory filing or looking at documentation, or this building up certain key processes. But now, in life sciences specifically, the GCCs have become strategic engines. They do a lot of high end work. They are participating in innovation, there's drug development, and providing end to end value. So it's also a compliance transformation engine for these GCCs. They no longer can say, oh, the parent company has all the controls. They also have to keep looking at how they are fueling in all the regulatory requirements. And also, as you know, that life sciences is a highly regulated industry. There's so much scrutiny at every level. So they are partners in crime now. So the board is equally invested. Leaders are equally invested as to what is the culture, what are the policies, how are we transforming, our initiatives into more technology-based, more digitally data-based centers, not just like the back-end office.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Sohel, basically you're saying that as some of the GCCs have evolved from back office service providers to more strategic contributors in product development, R&D, innovation, their
Yeah.
role in higher value adding activities have gone up. And that's where their proximity, their intimacy with the business, the regulatory compliance, whether they are of India or other countries, depending on what is being done, has also shot up quite dramatically.
Absolutely. Very well summarized.
Excellent. Well, Samriddhi, from your vantage point, managing compliance for entities listed across multiple global exchanges, how does this multi-jurisdictional exposure change the way Indian laws are interpreted? Do global regulatory requirements become the minimum threshold with global governance standards setting a higher bar for your compliance operations in India?
So, here, Rishi, in my experience, I'll tell you, while working, I have actually seen one thing that if the parent company is based out in India and has number of subsidiary outside, right, the compliances actually go, down upstream. In the similar manner, when the parent company is in US, in the similar manner, the compliances go downstream. So I would say over here is that the compliances has been, it's not only structured at the global level or to a regional level, but it is a kind of a combination of both. Here, what we are seeing in most of the industries and GCC, that the compliances there are different kind of a global practices, rules, regulations, which are coming down from the SEC for a matter, right? And it is very different when we talk about the SEBI regulation. But if we have to standardize the process on the regional level, we do add certain nuances which are required for the Indian GCC. So it's a kind of a merger of both the laws which are actually prevailing in the parent company country and in India at the same time.
No, very well said. So, what are the implications for a compliance professional like yourself and many of the
So
team members
the
that you have?
Yes. So the compliance perspective over here and the proposition, to be honest, is like we need to understand the gaps. So I'll just take one example for all the audience over here. Recently, there is a notification that has come for the DPDPA Act. And mostly, most of the company, even in India, before that actually was following the GDPR for the data protection. Right now, we are evaluating the gaps which are there in the GDPR and DPDPA because there are different obligation, different submission, different timelines given for each and every activity. So it's very important for the compliance professional officers in India to understand the gaps and to actually standardize the whole process geographically for all the companies of one group.
So basically, what it means is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that anybody who's managing the compliance function or participating in some capacity in compliance in the Indian GCC environment needs to be very familiar with the international standards
That is
because
very much that is very much correct because GCC in all the GCC companies, the policies are being cannot be just replicated in the same manner to the Indian companies, but having the knowledge of those policies, procedure is very much imperative.
so one of the additional action items on the India organization is also to make sure that their global peers and partners are familiarized with the India side of the regulations because a lot of times Indians are familiar with theirs, but the reverse is not naturally true.
Which is very much correct, and that's why there had been a different, earlier the traditional manual compliance framework was very different. Nowadays, when we'll talk about the modern compliance framework, it is completely different. So we use a number of tools, we do that digitization so that the global leaders have a kind of an insight about what kind of a compliances we are doing and how the strategy or the business growth can be taken far from those kind of a compliances decisions that we are making over here.
Excellent. Well, Saloni, let me bring you into the conversation. You've seen compliance in enforcement heavy Indian sectors like infrastructure, aviation, and so on. And now, in a global financial services environment, you are experiencing compliance. How does the presence of a global headquarters change leadership expectations? Do Indian business leaders approach compliance with a different mindset when decisions are being scrutinized across different jurisdictions?
Thanks for the question, Richie. So I have worked in regulatory heavy industries, like you've mentioned. But in my experience, finance, the BFSI industry that I'm in currently is at the topmost level in terms of, a reputational damage, if I may say so, that drives the entire organization to work towards compliance. Now, coming to your question, what is the leadership mindset in this? See, what leaders think globally and in GCCs, what we're talking about, they don't consider compliance as a support function. They consider it as a business. This is what I've seen, and this shift has happened in the last 2 to 3 years. And this is mainly due to the changing regulatory framework in India itself. So, India around 10
Can you
years
double click
ago,
on that? That's an interesting thing that you bring in. Can you double
yes,
click on that? Let's peel this onion a
sure.
little further.
Sure. So India about 10 years ago had very predictive regulatory framework in terms of how the regulatory mindset works. But in the last 10 years and mostly in the last 5 years, when it comes from something Samriddhi also touched upon, data protection perspective or even financial regulations, because we are heavily digitizing everywhere and there are multiple avenues opening up everywhere, so it's becoming a little difficult for the regulator as well to keep checks and balances on how companies are operating, and that is why they are more broadly releasing rules and regulations that may have room for interpretation, if I may say so. And if a compliance personnel goes wrong in interpreting any of those regulations, then the company has to pay for it. So I'll just focus on quickly what the leadership mindset is, taking a step back what you were asking originally. So now how they view compliance is, see, we are regulated by Indian regulators, right? Of course, while operating from India, RBI, SEBI, IRDAI, depending on the industry, and then also audited by global regulators. So there's SEC, there is FCA, OCC, SOX, and whatnot. There are a lot of things depending upon the industry. And then we are also scrutinized internally by group risk and audit teams. So long gone are those days where audits used to be our first line of defense. So if an organization is still depending on those, then it's a danger sign to run away from there and build probably make audit third or fourth line of defense for compliance.
Oh, very well said, Saloni. Dr. Sohal, you come from a highly regulated background, right? And a large named multinational organization with deep legacy of governance and compliance. How do their obligations change your day-to-day life? your obligations as compared to what typically you see in your peer partner organizations, which are natively India based?
So, it's very interesting because in life sciences, you already have built in additional controls. As India was evolving in its journey, now in healthcare, there are more and many rules that comes up. It's more data privacy. There is an APAC risk. There is cross-border information sharing. There is you can talk about these stem from the inherent um, nature of where the business is located and also where the parent company is. So it's always said, I'll say that to make it very easy for the audience, I'd always say that you have to look at the rule of the land. And second thing is you also have to marry and match the compliance of your parent company. And whichever is more stricter, you have to follow that. So that covers and that makes life a bit easy for the compliance and legal and regulatory to set up the processes. That's the starting point. Now there will be changes, there will be minor tweaks. Now for us, as I say, we also had a major landscape change with the uh, Department of Health and Family came up with unified practices for all the companies, whether they are pharmaceutical or they are, digitally based companies supporting healthcare. So we look at from that perspective, we look at what is stricter rule of law and follow that and make it into a policy. For example, now I would say one example I would share is your regulatory reporting. Now, regulatory reporting is very important because most of these back-end offices do they prepare dossiers for new drugs to be submitted to the, various FDA, to European agency, to our DCGI. Now, a lot of controls have built in, and now we are using AI to ensure that there's no duplication, there's acceleration. We also look at intelligence to see and scrutinize what's happening around the globe. So I would say compliance in GCC is becoming way of life. So we are using technology, we are using AI to ensure that we are compliant with processes, not just for India, because the base office is here, or it could be Poland now, which is another popular destination, or Malaysia. There are three proper hubs where where these centers are. So the important thing is that you have to look at uh, the regulatory framework, which is more stricter, and ensure that all the processes are aligned and make it faster and quicker. What we're looking at in our world is that there should be no duplication, there should be audit trail, and you should be always ready because the inspectors can walk in anytime.
Oh, excellent. Very well made points. Now, one of the things that I want to bring up here is an important dimension of culture. Now, GCC compliance teams often sit at the intersection of global compliance framework and the local business realities. How does this affect internal conversations, especially when teams are expanding global standards? They are explaining the international standards to their Indian stakeholders, and vice versa when you're trying to explain rules based and inspection driven systems. How do those conversations happen? What kind of cultural uh, differences do you typically observe? This is an open question, please feel free.
As I was talking, I'll just say that uh, culture is something which everybody owns. Yeah. Now, this is a job not of the compliance officer these days. It's a compliance of your leader, the leader of GCC, how they set the tone. When they set the tone, it's very important that the others follow. That makes the life of a compliance officer very easy. So it is no longer rule based now. What intent is to move away from rule based to passion based to your accountability based to having your own impact. So what impact are you having as DCC? If you are having the right impact and embedding the cultural pillars of your parent company, that's where the magic starts.
No, well said. So just to bring an element here, The way we think about Indian laws, the way the law is written, the way it is interpreted, the way it is practiced, and the way it is enforced, there are transmission losses between them. So
Yeah.
companies who are natively born in India, they traditionally have had a little bit of a chalta hai, hota hai, dekh lenge, manage karenge, jab hoga tab dekha jayega kind of a culture. And this whole concept of compliance management is very alien to, an international company who's trying to do stuff in India, because there the way the law is written is how it needs to be interpreted and how it needs to be practiced and how it needs to be enforced. The transmission loss from the theory to the practice is very limited. So when you're trying to explain how it works here,
Yeah.
because in our experience, helping corporations stay on the right side of the law, we have seen that you can never be 100% compliant with the Indian law. And I'll give you an example. In the Factories Act of 1948, which has recently been put in the museum, there is a compliance for thugdan, which basically means you will deploy spittoons in a factory setup. Now, these laws were written in 1948. Now, you run a pharmaceutical manufacturing setup, try putting a spittoon in the manufacturing environment. You will lose not only the FDA certifications, you'll also lose the CDSCO and the Drug and Cosmetic Act, and some of these things will not be permissible. So while the letter of the law requires you to do certain things, but the interpretation and the practice and the enforcement often accounts for certain practical aspects while we have enforced them in the real life. When you say this to somebody in an international setup, they'll be spooked, saying, what are we talking about and how does it work? So I'm trying to understand, having seen both sides of the border, how does it often come together?
Like I would, so I'm sticking to one point is regulatory submissions. Now, DCGI, you know, it's a complex place. You get lost, it's like a Pandora's box. You can never find your way in, you cannot find your way out. So how do you make sure that your teams are following and not somebody will say, sir, chai pila do bas, and that chai pilane ka has a big connotation behind it. Chai pilana means does not means how, if you want your file to move fast from your table and you want early resolution of your query or your concern, then chai pilana is a different thing. So how do you train people on that chai pilana? Is good. You can still wait and bite the dust for maybe say 2 weeks and directly influence, bring in your senior leaders, directly influence, share a challenge with your teams, and not take the risk yourself. No, I'll tell you, it's not a level playing field. Now, like for example, X company had a partnership with a B company, who's an Indian company, to have a joint sales force. Now, those people were very tuned to working with doctors and providing, Diwali gifts and, travels and families coming for the meeting and all that. Now, how do you pick up those nuances early on and make sure that your team is armored and equipped to say no? You can go down in numbers, but you can't go and do this. Even one incident can derail the reputation of
Well,
that
you,
company.
you deal with Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and
Yes.
anti-bribery regulations. I used to work for a large American bank for the first part of my career. I spent 12 years working with them, and the practices were absolutely rigid. And you could report a lower revenue growth, but you couldn't report, cut corners on compliance and governance. So let me bring you in, Samriddhi, into the conversation. You heard the discussion. Dr. Sohil articulated some of her areas. What do you think?
So, first of all, Rishi, I would just, give one of the insight over here, which is very factual, and it is actually going to tremendously take place in the coming few years in India. Right now, India is having 35% of the GCC uh, of all over the world, and it is actually going at a very large scale. There are many states which are inviting more GCC to open their offices in India. And while we say this, right, India is just not, the back support office, it is also an extended headquarter. So when we talk about the compliance, right, that how we are having a conversation with the global stakeholder who are the SBU head for the legal and counsel and the head over here in India, it is very well balanced, because the first thing is that the company has been incorporated in, let's suppose, US, and everything is actually coming down to India. But right now, since India is actually partnering at a very high stake level with the parent company, the compliance is not a bottleneck. Now, the compliance is a kind of an enabler, and it is actually making the strategic decision for the parent company. So I'll just give one of the instance over here. See, in the SEBI regulation, if you want in the asset management company, if you want to have a portfolio managers in India, you have to actually take the license from SEBI. But if we have a update on the compliances, on the notifications at the real time, we know that we have a lot of exemptions under the gift city. We can actually have a branch office in gift city, and we can still hire the portfolio managers without having the license from the SEBI. So what is very important is that we should have the updates, the real time updates on the compliances on the state level, on the central level at the same time, and it should be communicated to the global stakeholders so that the business growth can be seen at a scale level that they are expecting. So this is how the communication flows in the normal GCC setup.
Excellent. Saloni?
Yeah, so just going back to an earlier point that you made, Rishi, you spoke about the Factories Act and one of the compliances which may not be followed by a lot of companies. So I'll tell you a major difference between Indian companies and how globally the companies think in terms of compliance, right? So Indians have traditionally gone with a prioritization approach. They go for the compliance which draws hefty penalty. They go for the compliances are which are very crucial to their business, and these are the ones that get prioritized. But with the GCCs coming in and India becoming a hub spot for such GCCs, there is a shift that we are seeing in terms of a zero tolerance environment. So the GCCs, because the compliance rules or the policies gets cascaded, there is an inherent environment that is being created where there is low margin for any sort of interpretational errors, or even procedural lapses have reputational consequences, like I was telling earlier on. So I think this shift is for the good, changing a lot of Indian company mindsets as well from a compliance perspective. And because major jurisdictions that we work with, US and EU, have traditionally had, hefty penalties, and also a lot of judicial precedents have time and again stressed on how important compliances are. And it's sometimes it's scary, the kind of penalties that have been levied on the company. So there are a lot of companies over there who have gone bankrupt as well. So I think India is definitely seeing a shift, a major one at that, but there is still a long way to go.
Oh, excellent. I think very clear that compliance professionals working in tradition and GCC setups, they end up navigating both the jurisdictions or multiple jurisdictions. So the fungibility in your mind, the adaptability, the resilience, the switching gears between one kind of law, one interpretation, one jurisdiction, one kind of environment changes dramatically from the other. Now, managing this, right? This causes a huge chaos when you manage it. Traditional Indian companies have worked with ad hoc, paper based, and people dependent compliance programs. They've not had a lot of digitizations, while our sales went and became digital with CRM systems. Our production planning and accounting became digital with ERPs. Our productivity systems came in. A lot of digitization has happened, but compliance function, unfortunately, has continued to languish. You expect a compliance officer to help you manage your business and growth in 21st century. They are managing with the laws or written in the 19th and 20th century, and they are managing with tools that were created 30, 40 years ago. Most compliance professionals still use Excel as their best friend. Question is, in a GCC kind of a setup, what has been your experience managing compliance? I mean, what level of visibility, accountability, transparency, traceability, audit trails? I think Dr. Sohal mentioned audit trails and so on and so forth. How do you balance the two?
So, Rishi, I'll take up this question and I'll answer this very briefly. In most of the GCC, in my own experience and from the very compliance officer perspective of the peer group, I know that now India has adapted the tech at a greater level now. So the automation earlier, it was that 60-70% of the time of any compliance officer was actually going for the coordination and chasing people to actually gather the data, which is all fragmented across, let's suppose, people, team, finance, team, IT, and facility. Everybody was doing their own interpretation of law and they were implementing it. Right now, the tech has enabled it in a manner that all the data has been collated at one place. The interpretation is coming clearly. If there is any gaps, the departmental heads are discussing it, and at the same time, it is getting implemented. So this is how it is actually, the tech is helping it for the workflow, for creating the audit trail that you have said, to actually also have the evidence into the place. Because when, as Dr. Simranth has also said it, that, when there is a investigation that comes into the play, there is a chaos that goes around into the organization, that how to actually assemble all the data at one place. But when I talk about the tech is actually helping everything to automate for the compliance officer. And compliance officer, on the top of that, actually helping the CEOs and CXOs now to actually tell them that what is the risk appetite of a company, what risk to prioritize, what strategy decisions to be made at the same time. So this is how the tech is helping the company, and this is how the whole modern framework is looking like in GCC.
Well, great points there. Just to bring a little more data-driven insights here, we work with over 3,000 entities in India, a company with a couple of states worth of operation, with some factory establishment, some shops and establishment. A mid-sized company in India deals with a few thousand compliances a year. They are between time-based, event-based, ongoing kind of compliances. There are license-based, registration-based, consent orders, variety of returns, registers, and challans, hundreds of payments in a year, displays, exemptions. All of these are examples of compliances. Based on our assessment, there are 21 unique types of compliances, 28 instruments outside of the primary legislation and the subordinate legislation that creates compliance obligations for enterprises, 3,756 websites which publish regulatory updates. Last year, there were close to 13,000 regulatory updates, depending on who you are, what you do, where you're based. A subset of these 13,000 will be applicable. Discovery of them is a huge problem. It's like pulling teeth. Interpreting changes can be a problem. Many of them don't have predictable frequencies. Many of them become applicable from immediate effect. So, we have our own fair share of problems. So, unless there is a method to the madness, there is a power of digital tools around you, this can be a nightmare. So,
You
Dr.
know,
Sohal, I can see you're itching to,
yeah,
make a commentary. Go ahead.
this is my life and this is my world. This is where we stay. And those there are those company acts, and then there is those ever-changing rules, and then there's always a scrutiny from DOJ, SEC. So there's some things that we have learned over time, and I thought I'd love to share that with the audience. It is standardized before you digitize. It's very fancy and it's very, very, upstream. Oh, I'm digitalizing this process. I'm telling you, if you have not standardized your processes beforehand, you have not built in your races or your workflows, the digital will be a more chaos. It will put more pitfalls. It will throw you all the, false positives before it can actually give you real data where you can draw insights. My second urge to everybody would be, please engage very early with your stakeholders, your legal, IT, or security, because cross-functional alignment is very important. You may think that you fix it from privacy, you fix it from ABAC, but there could be some legal compliances which you have not looked into and which could be a biggest derailer. The other one is have a unified compliance data layer. Have a single source of truth. Duplication. If you have your SAP data, you have your data sitting for your investigation, the data sitting in for your company and your compliance acts. If they do not talk to each other, then it's going to be a nightmare and it's going to be a mayhem for everybody. And the last and not the least is you have to keep upskilling the compliance officers. You cannot just have fancy tools without people getting educated. They also have to understand where what's the frequency, what are they looking at, what's the data talking to them as, because data is as good as your insights you can make out of it.
Well, you preempted my question, so I was going to switch gears, and I think you took the bull by the horns there. I wanted to understand what are the insights. There are three professionals between them, about 50 years of experience managing compliance across various jurisdictions. I wanted to understand, what should our audience learn from your collective experience? What should they do differently? So I think one or two brilliant points made Dr. Sohal there is, engage with your stakeholders, make sure you have a seat on the high table, you understand where the business is growing, what the domain looks like, what the domain related challenges are, what products and services does the company is looking to produce, where the long term growth plan looks like, because each one of these will have implications on your organization's compliance and your planning, your strategy, your toolings, your trainings, your knowledge sessions, and so on and so forth. So I think that point is very well made. Samriddhi, Saloni, maybe
Yeah,
Saloni first.
I would like to build on to what Dr. Simrat said, and it also speaks about the range of her experience so far. So I think, Rishi, this is a perfect time to underline the oversight to insight thing, right? Now, what shift are we looking at? So we're looking to move on from tracking changes to anticipating impact, to see what is going to happen in the future, not just wait for regulations to come up and then act on them. Then we are also looking to move from checklists to a risk based prioritization. You were speaking about the Excel sheets, and I know a few compliance officers who still continue to use that. I think it works better for them, but as long as the company is compliant, right? And
The
then we
only
move
problem
on,
is Excel sheets don't flag risks. They
of
don't
course,
speak, they
then
don't
it has to be
communicate.
fed into the technology.
They don't tell you which law has changed yesterday evening, what the
Absolutely.
implications are. That's the problem with spreadsheets.
Absolutely. For that, you have to always rely on the alerts, although they are not comprehensive, but you do have to rely on AI and the alerts and the technology shows up. And then we also have to make a shift from legally owned mindset or a compliance owned mindset to a business embedded compliance. And I see this happening, this change happening, but I cannot speak for smaller organization where compliance could still be crucial, right? And there are smaller organizations who are operating in heavily regulated industries, so that again becomes crucial. And then specifically in BFSI, the question is no longer are we compliant, and I think this should generally apply to all the industries. It is how early did we see this coming? And if we have a compliance team and a business team working together who is working on a predictive mode, then the organization is good to go.
No, excellent. I mean, you're very right. Spreadsheets have been, I would like to call them as the Swiss Army knife of the business world. We end up using them for everything, including compliance management. But it is typically like performing a heart surgery with the same pocket knife. I mean, it doesn't work, right? So we have to move away from this. Digitization is the way to go. AI is changing the role of a compliance professional. We are working extensively as a company on building AI use cases where you can move from just chasing people, using spreadsheets, um, calling people, spending sleepless nights before your board meetings to make sure that your compliance certificates are in order and all of those details are there. Instead, the whole idea is to use technology to go through, find a needle in a haystack, go through loads of data, find risks, find trends, find behaviors, put the spotlight on poor behaviors, flag risks before they start manifesting. So unless organizations go in that direction, hope is not a strategy, as they say, right? I mean, just hoping that you are on the right side of the law doesn't work. And in an environment like India, where there are three levels of the compliance between union, state, and local body levels, there are 7 categories of the law, over 70,000 compliances that affect doing business, 37% of them carrying criminality and jail term for KMPs, and so on and so forth. Unless there are systems-based approach, risk-based approach, documents are reposited in one place, multiple levels of review, accountability, having dashboards that flag delays, that identify gaps, that identify poor behaviors, you will never be able to gravitate towards a assurance-based, evidence-based compliance culture. And if that happens, then every now and then when you are going through audits and reviews, you will constantly spend time just explaining to the world why it is the way it is. So very, very well said. I know we are about 42 minutes into the conversation. I would like to kind of wrap up in about 6 to 7 minutes, bringing in some open thoughts on what the key takeaways should be, how young professionals who want to start a career in compliance, and if they are looking to make a career in the GCC organizations, what should they be doing? What are the takeaways from your experience on managing compliance better? From knowledge point of view, from toolings point of view, from communication between India management and yourself, between global management and global risk and compliance teams and your organization, what are the key takeaways and how technology is playing an important role there?
Can I just add a few points here,
Please,
Rishi?
go ahead.
Yeah. So, for the audience over here, I would like to actually state the first thing that, when they join any company as a very young professional, it could be a large company, it could be a mid-sized company or a startup company. My suggestion to all those compliance officers who are budding right now is to not to wait for the digitization that the company can go to a certain scale. If they're going to wait for it, the transition, the fragmentation is going to too much that it is going to be too hard to handle the compliance at one place for them. The second thing is that if the compliance at that particular scenario is going to be dependent on the people, there is a high chance that the institutional knowledge is going to get lost. It is just going to sit in an inbox, but it is not just going to be visible to everybody across the firm, across the company. So it's a very fair, I guess, ask to everyone that I would like to make is that it's very imperative that we should keep the technology, we should adapt the technology, and we should integrate the technology as soon as possible. And we should not wait for the company to scale up. The second thing that I want to tell over here is that the updates are very important. In today's world, we are actually not thinking that whether we are compliant or not, but we are thinking that whether we are aware of the updates or not. Because if we are not aware of the updates, our business is going to get impacted because of it. I'll just take one example for the audience over here, which is related to the high frequency trading firm like Citadel Securities, right? They are actually doing too many trading at one day by the algorithm that they set. But if the BSE or the SEBI comes out with a new circular on particular day, they have to actually change the whole algorithm. And if they are delayed for even one day, there is a hefty penalty on those high frequency trading firms. So it's very important that they should be updated on the changes as well so that they know that what is the business impact and how they are going to grow.
Oh, absolutely. And I think our regulatory updates is kind of broken. I gave you some numbers before. When we digitized, we converted paper to PDF. Unfortunately, machines don't read PDFs very well. It is not easy to extract the actionable from the PDF. It doesn't give you a comparison between what was the obligation before that and after that. So there's a lot more human work required in even interpreting the basic things here. So I know we have only 3 or 4 minutes left. Let me bring in Dr. Sohal on the conversation. Go ahead, Dr. Sohal.
So I think I'll just give two pieces of advice. I'm from medical background. I switched gears and I moved into this compliance profession. So the key is to be a strategic business partner. Don't wear the compliance hat when you walk into meetings. Do your pre-reads very well. Understand where are the bleeding points of the business. How can you enable the business? Where the risks lie. So I leave you with three acronyms. You should always be an enabler. You should be able to predict and you should be able to protect. If you have these three tools and these three things in your hand, you are going to be the best compliance officer, whether you're working for a parent company or for GCC. And then definitely there are tools which can support you to make faster decisions, to identify gaps beforehand, to use predictive AI, to ensure that you're always audit ready and you are upscaling your compliance program on a daily basis.
No, I love the way you said it. You couldn't have said it any better that, when you walk into a room full of business leaders, don't keep wearing your compliance hat all the time. You have to tune into where they are taking the business, what the long-term goals are, what they are trying to create, and then figure out how you can enable the whole process rather than constantly put your foot on the brake and slow everything down. So I think becoming a business partner, like years ago, they changed the language to HR business partner, right? Earlier, it was only called HR. Now it was called HR business partner because the whole idea was HR is supposed to help business deliver what their core goals are. I mean, similarly, compliance professional needs to do the same thing. Now, Saloni, we have only 2 more minutes left. I do want to bring you into the conversation, see if you have any specific insights.
Yes, quickly putting in some do's and don'ts for everyone as a takeaway. So, definitely, let's proceed with do's first. So, definitely, what compliance team should be doing is design the compliance framework along with business, the risk team, and the legal team, so that all these teams are on board from the time you draft your policies, which could be routing from laws or could be routing from internal policies. But it is very important to have their buy-in and also their understanding on what you're looking for the future of the company. Then we also have embedding controls into workflows, right? Technology is a non-negotiable right now. It is an absolute necessity for a business to track and be 100% compliant, which is possible, by the way. And then measuring compliance health and not just the closure. So it's not something that you tick off. Someone was speaking about a checklist. It needs to be a continuous monitoring. Of course, between the regulatory velocity and lots of regulations coming in, you do not have the time or the space to check the compliance health. But this needs to be a continuous process. If need be, hire resources, expand your team, but this is a must. And going to some of the don'ts quickly, we should not be over controlling low risk processes. Low risk processes do not need the kind of attention sometimes that we give to them as a business, because ultimately the business is looking to grow. So if you are becoming a bottleneck, you should realize that, and also give them what, based on the risk appetite, what is the advice that a compliance professional could give. And then do not assume global policies fit Indian regulation. That does not happen. So you have to assess it from a jurisdictional perspective, depending on the kind of policies and compliance frameworks that you're working with, also the industry that you're in. And thirdly, do not treat audits as the starting point. As I was speaking earlier, if audit is your first line of defense, then you're already late. So please keep that in mind.
Well, very well said. I know we have to wrap up because of some operational reasons today, but I do want to leave the audience with one simple thought. Compliance in GCCs is not about doing more compliance, it's about doing it differently. It's about moving from oversight to insight, from reacting to rules, to anticipating the risks, shaping behaviors, and earning trust across borders. So, with that, let me first thank our participants and panelists for sharing their experience and some wonderful insights on the subject of managing cross-border multi-jurisdictional compliances and its challenges, and how digital technologies are reshaping the behaviors. So thank you for taking the time. We had close to 100 participants listening into this conversation today. I'm sure many of you are upcoming compliance professionals, and many of you are looking for insights to implement in your organizations. So thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience, and I look forward to hosting you sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.